Well, it's time to get started. Today we're going to have a nice talk, and the thing that's going to be wonderful about today's talk is that it's really about something that's hard to put in on paper. It's hard to do anything except describe. And you want it to be done by people who have really done this kind of a project. And what I'm describing now, you notice I kind of teased into it, is the idea of designer-developer interaction. Now, the way we started is we started a development project, and one of our speakers today is Keith. I'm going to do this informally, but Keith is a developer that likes to do artistic things, but he's a developer, and we do developer things in developer ways. We knew we needed designers, and there were these new tool chains. Now, from web services, we have Matt. Matt's kind of a Apple kind of guy. He likes those big screens. He likes all those goofy tools, you know, that you do in Mac ways. And designers and developers don't think the same at times, and they really do need to focus differently. So how do you get this together? There are all these new tools and how to do it. And over time, what was probably uncomfortable in the beginning has evolved into at least a form that's worked fairly well. And it's something that's going to be happening more and more, as that designer-developer interaction. And if we use things like WPF or Silverlight, there's now a way to do it, which is a view model interface. And that's kind of like the level where you have designers looking at views down into the view model, and they can use developer or designer tools like Blend to look at projects. Developers produce those tools and produce the assets that can be consumed. And so our talk today is how we're going to get this behavior behind designers and developers on something that's real code. And these are two people who have done this now for a couple of years, and the warts have really been worked out to the stage where they can do this fairly quickly and fairly efficiently. And so I think this is a wonderful talk today on something that's of practical importance. So we have Keith and we have Matt, and they can introduce themselves in more detail.
Thanks, Mark. Please hold your applause till the end. Just kidding. All right. So, like Mark said, what we're going to be talking about tonight is WPF using Blend 4.0. Now, a little bit of background about myself. I am a developer, as the slide will show, and like Mark said, a lot of times my focus is not necessarily the same focus that Matt has when he's working on the look and feel and some of the thought behind the user interaction of the application. But one of my primary things that I focus on is making sure that the end product is structured nicely so I can maintain it down the road. Luckily, the tools that we have now to do this make that a lot easier than it has been in the past. So I'm going to jump right in and let you know what I'm going to try to accomplish here. I want to give you an overview of what WPF is. How many of you have experience with WPF? We have some. Okay, good. I'm not going to go into depth on a lot of these first points. I'm going to give you enough of an introduction so I can, so you can follow along with what I actually do in the tools. Okay. I'm going to go over a little bit of the MVVM pattern, which is model, view, view model. I'm going to give you a little bit more knowledge of some of the essentials of WPF itself, namely notify property changed, one of the things you have to be able to, you have to use in your view model, how commands work, and how you can use value converters to change what is displayed in your view from your back end. And then the last 4 points are all meat and potatoes for what you're going to do in Blend. It's really where the tooling makes it much easier to deal with these objects in Blend than it does in your Visual Studio. And then I'm also going to show you, Blend in action. All right. And at the end, we'll go ahead and talk about some of our experiences of how the kind of workflow goes between developing and designing an application, and kind of how the give and take comes in there. All right, number one, WPF. It's Microsoft's newest platform for UI development. It allows you to decouple your UI from your business logic, which in the past, I'm sure anybody who's been developing for a while has seen the problems where all of your business logic is handled in click events, firing off something, all tied directly to your UI. WPF lets you pull those apart, so changing the back end doesn't affect the front end, and likewise changing the front end doesn't affect the back end. WPF also allows you to produce designs you just couldn't do in the past. Or let me rephrase that. It gives you a way to cost effectively produce designs that you really couldn't do in the past. Much more flexible than what you could do with WinForms, for example. And if any of you are not desktop developers thinking, why would I care about WPF? Well, the technology and a lot of the techniques you use with WPF directly correlate to what you can do in Silverlight for the web. There's a very small sliver of things that are different between the two of them. You really just have to recognize where those areas are. So any buildup of knowledge that you have on WPF would not be lost if you are also looking at Silverlight. Tooling. Visual Studio 2010 and Blend 4 are the only two pieces of tools you can use, well, the only two Microsoft tools you can use to target .NET 4. You cannot use 2008 effectively and do that. If you are using .NET 3.5, then you can use 2008 and Blend 3. Just a heads up there. Model view model. How much does anybody have much experience with this pattern here? We do have a few. Okay, this is really the pattern that was built to allow you to take advantage of WPF. It's really a model view presenter clone kind of. It's a one-off of a model view presenter for any of you familiar with that. But it allows you to isolate your business logic from your view. The view knows about the view model. The view model knows about the model, but the view does not know directly about the model, and the model does not know anything about the view. Okay, that's the whole gist of what it does. You access data in your view model using bindings, and I'll show you some of the binding capabilities that you have with WPF later on. iNotify property changed. It is simply an interface that allows you to notify whenever a property changes. Imagine that. You want to implement that in your view model mainly for any property that you want to have changed while a view is open. Okay, if you have a piece of data that's static, you only set it once, it doesn't really have to implement it. But if you have a piece of data that is going to change throughout the life of your view, you'll want that property to go ahead and notify whenever it changes. There's a nice toolkit that really helps out with this. It's the MVVM Lite toolkit, and it is what the example project that we have uses. It takes a lot of the monotonous pieces out of creating this pattern. Commanding. And actually, let me go ahead and show you a little bit of examples of this while I'm going through here. If I can find it. This is the example project we created for the presentation. And just to show you, my shell project is the main piece of the application. All right? It's what drives it. It has model code, it has views, and it has view models. Organized, this is kind of a standard way to organize your projects. You can do it however you want, but it just makes it a little bit easier to find. The model contains all of the back-end logic, okay? And in this case, our main model is really tying in to our data. We have a data model I have defined in a separate assembly, as you notice here. It really has all of the database calls and all that. So my main, the main model is really only making calls into that data model. So I don't have to do any straight SQL or any of that in my main project. Now the view model, and this is primarily what I wanted to show you here. I hope we can see. We don't have a lot of real estate. Let me see if I can collapse some of this stuff. Okay. Now I was just talking about commands. Now here, if I want a particular button click to fire off something in the view model, there has to be a way to hook it up, right? Now all of your all of your objects that have any sorts of commands, if you want to bind to them, you have to bind to an object that implements iCommand. In this case, relay command does that. This is also provided for you by the MVVM Lite toolkit, so you don't have to create it. Another option, like my slide said that I jumped away from a little too quickly, is that you can go ahead and create your own. And there's example code out there that you can use to do that. That's pretty good. Or if you use, for example, Prism. I mean, how many of you heard of Prism? Prism. If you use Prism, it also has a similar implementation for similar to relay command. It's a delegate command, I believe. That's enough of that. Let me go ahead and jump back here. Oh, that's not it. All right. Ah, there's the link. If you want to build your own, you can do that. In fact, on the current project that we're working on, we went ahead and built our own. It gives you can extend it and makes it a little bit nicer on some things. But also, at the time when we created it, the MVVM Lite toolkit wasn't even built yet, so we had to, muddle through on some of those pieces ourselves. Value converters. These are nice for allowing you in XAML, in your view, to go ahead and switch what is displayed for a particular value. Jump over and show you a quick example of what I'm talking about there. iValue converter interface. All you have to do is create a class that implements iValue converter, and you can then directly use that in your XAML. Okay? It's a very simple class. It has a convert method and a convert back method. And how it works is in your view, if you use a value converter on one of your bindings, it takes whatever the value that comes in the object, in the value property, which is just an object. It could be anything, string, int, a foobar object, and allows you to go ahead and run code against it to figure out what do I want to spit back out. In this case, the not Boolean converter, it's coming in, it's going to make sure this value is a Boolean, and if it is, it's just going to throw back the opposite. So it may not make sense here, but when you see the the XAML, I'll show you how I used it on my radio buttons. All right, and we also have a match to Boolean converter. This is a little bit more, takes a little bit more into it. This converter will go ahead and take a value, and you also have an additional parameter that comes in. In this case, I just want to see, does my value equal my parameter? And if it does, I'm going to return true. If it doesn't, I'm returning false. So it's a quick and dirty way that you can set up named commands kind of in your XAML to then turn something on or turn something off based on that. Let me jump back here now. There are also, besides I-value converter, there's also I-multi-value converter. The difference being value converter takes one input object to base its conversion on, whereas the multi-value does what it says. It can take in multiple inputs, so you could have a more complex criteria for what you're going to spit out. All right, styles. Styles are it's kind of like WPF's CSS, cascading style sheets. It allows you to define a list of properties that you want to apply to a certain type of object. In this example, the type here is radio button, and I want to set these specific values for this list of properties on a radio button. And this is XAML too, by the way. Has everybody dealt with XAML? Hopefully, not yet. It's markup. It's XML markup. And this is what your view is composed of, as well as the code behind. The only objects that you can apply a style to are objects that derive from a framework element or a framework content element. And those are two pieces defined within the WPF framework. Control templates. A control template essentially lets you completely rebuild the plumbing of a control if you want, as far as what is visually rendered. You could take and swap out the control template for a text box to, instead of a simple box with your text in it, have a box with flowers around it and little fairies that come to, yeah. I mean, you can do all kinds of crazy things on the template itself. This is something that you really couldn't do very well. You couldn't do it dynamically at all, as far as I'm aware of, in WinForms without doing probably some crazy, Win32 stuff, right? With WPF, it makes it really easy, and it makes it much easier in Blend than having to hand code them. I'll show you how to do that. Data templates. These also let you kind of define these let you define how data is going to look, I guess, an object looks. Very useful list boxes and combo boxes. Each of your items in your list, you can define a data template for them. So instead of simply one text value, you could pull off multiple values and arrange them however you'd like, or change colors based on certain things. A lot of possibilities open up for you here, all of which can be dynamically changed at runtime as well. So, all right, the example app, just a little bit of background of what it is. It's simply an app that lets you define certain directories on your machine as libraries. A particular directory would be defined as a library. and it'll take a look at all the images in that directory or in any of the subdirectories under it, and pull them in to a database so you can manage what sort of data is associated with them, tags on them, and lets the user easier manage it. You can probably do all the same stuff in Windows one way or another, but it makes for an interesting subject matter for creating an app anyway. It does use a SQL compact database. So using SQL compacts, we don't have to worry about creating a new instance of a database or anything. Much easier to deploy as well. Import it in, and well, that's enough. Let's go ahead and run it. Let me drop out here. And I'm going to go ahead and go over to Blend. Now, any straight developers who've never used Blend, don't get scared. It's all right. I know it looks different, but all the same stuff you're used to is here in just a little bit different form. Okay. Let me go ahead and build this and run it just so you can see the functionality. All right. Well, it's a little dark against that. Maybe we shouldn't have gone with all black against the black background, a little bit harder to see. But anyway, allows you to add a library. So I'm going to go ahead and browse out. I'm going to find a directory that has some images in it. I'll select this one. And it's going to run through and suck out all the path information about the images that are in there and show us the total list here. Right now it's showing us all within that subdirectory, or within that directory, and any subdirectories. If I'm interested in only the root, no path information here, I can click on the little folder icon, and it just shows me just the images in that directory. Likewise, I can go through the different subdirectories and see what's in there as well. For those of you interested in the database structure, pull this up. It's a very dumbed down version of a database, right? 5 tables. Right now, there are only 2 tables that are really doing anything in the application. We did have more features planned that we didn't have time to implement. Right now, you can pull in libraries, you can pull in images, but you can't associate any data with them at this point. That'll be in a future release, hopefully updated sometime after this presentation. And each image has certain information on it. It has what its name is. It has what the extension is of the file itself. And the path information holds the relative path from the library it's associated with. So these are the examples of what those paths are for the images. Okay. We also wanted to show the ability to show a different view of my associated images. Right now we're showing small icons for this, but we wanted to also switch over and see large icons, see tiles where it showed the larger image with a list of data, and a further content where it would show smaller images with more data associated with them, more of those tag information. All that didn't make it into this release, but it'll be there, I promise. Okay, that's the guts of what this does. Now, obviously, this didn't start out looking as pretty as this does, as nice as this does. It started out, oh, I should have let that run so I can just see the images. It started out essentially on a piece of scrap paper of this is what I want to do. Let me load that back up. So we'll go to the progression here, the original. All right, here's the initial design. It's pretty close to what we've got now, actually. I mean, we got a list of folders that are in something, a root, it's a library. And I want to see in folder 4.3 all the images, as well as a few notes on what's going on there. This also then made it to the whiteboard, where the idea of toggling the views came in, and it'd pop up with, you know, images and tag data down below. This is I'm sure this is very similar to how a lot of, you know, ideas, you know, come to be, right? And then this is the original. This is the working app original, and all of these are snapshots that I took of the app running and emailed them to Matt. I didn't hear back from Matt after a little bit, though. I'm afraid he might have went into shock when he saw how terrible, you know, this looked. But it was a good starting point. It shows a lot of the intent. It shows the layout. A lot of the layout is very similar, right? But that's where it started, right? And from that, I got an email back that said, hey, how about something more like this? Bump it up. Whoa, too big. Something more like this. Okay, that shouldn't be too bad. And let's show the you know, the images like this. Now, unfortunately, I mean, the layout's kind of like that, right? I got 3 columns. But it was going to take more work to figure out sizing and things on the back end to do it quite as nice as this. But so anyway, but that was the first iteration right there, and this is the first pushback from Matt in the design section to figure out how we want this to look. And you'll notice in here as well that one difference that we can see. As far as what is selected, the icons for either all or just the folder started out up top, right next to the view. It wasn't until the next iteration this is step 2, where then I went ahead and added in showing some libraries. So this is 2 different libraries. I've got a pictures library that I'm managing, and which is the current library selected, and it's got some subfolders, right? And then a sample pictures library as well. And when Matt saw that, he said, "Oh, now I see what this, you know, all and folder is really all about." And he came back with the next design, where he actually put it in a blend. The first images were done with Photoshop. So just
on a Macintosh.
So they were really good. They looked really good. The next iteration, you went ahead and fired up Blend and started creating some of the resources for that. And unfortunately, I was working at home, and you were working here in the office, so easiest thing is just snap a snapshot of his workspace and emailed it to me. So right here we can see Blend, and that looks like a lot of real estate, doesn't it? That's 2 30-inch.
No. 2 24-inch.
Oh, just 24-inch monitors. Just messing with you, Matt. But anyway, so this was the first iteration put into Blend. So all of that on that original snapshot, he sent that over to me. I took a look at it, and then he came back with the updated version, where now you know, these controls are now moved down underneath, and instead of showing a growing list of buttons for each library, to just show them with a drop down. So you're not taking up as much real estate. And then at that point, went ahead and implemented that, and that's the state that it's in right now. So that's kind of how the work kind of went back and forth between us on those steps. All right. Where was I? Oh, yeah. Okay. Now, what's opened here is the same solution that was opened in Visual Studio. That's a key point. You don't have to have two separate repositories, two separate projects for working on this. Blend opens the same solutions and projects that Visual Studio does. So any changes made in Blend, somebody fires it up in Visual Studio, you're going to see the same changes. So that's consolidated together. Makes it easier to work on that. I've been talking too much, apparently. It's getting 35 minutes in. All right. Now, just to show you that first original working prototype was put out there, I can change what window starts up in here. It still exists. And I forgot what it was called. Original. So I'm going to change this to main project original. Save it and build it. And right there it is. I can add whatever images I want. Let's take a look at some pictures here. And they come up as buttons on here. That's the other part I don't think we saw on the screenshots. We didn't used to have even images. All we had was just a list of, you know, what the names of the images are. But it still works. You click it and it brings up Photo Viewer. And this is running off of the same view model, right? So in order to change this to look like this, I didn't have to go in and change, you know, how things are loaded or, you know, any of that. It just fires up using the same view model on a different view. Okay, let's change that back. And take a look at the demo window. All right. Now this demo window is identical to the final version, right? The only thing that it doesn't have is it does not have any of the styling applied. Okay, so like one thing you'll notice is all of my radio buttons, you know, there's no text, there's no nothing. All I got is a button that I can just click around, right? I want to show you how I can take assets that Matt created and apply them to that, okay? And in the same solution, there's a window design. This is the window that Matt created. I emailed him the project. He fired it up in Blend and added a window and started, you know, adding all the resources and styling it the way that the design vision, you know, that he added to it. Okay. And I can't see any of it. Okay. So if I want to take this asset, which is a path, it's hard to see on here, my storyboard, object and timeline, This is showing me all of the controls, all of the layout panels in this window. So at my root is a window object. It has in it a grid, a layout root, and it's got grids in it, and you drill down, nested. And this path is in here, and it lives right there, okay? If I want to take this asset itself and place it in the other window, I can simply copy it, close up some of these so I can see the demo window. All right. And what I'm going to do here, pretty sure I could paste it directly into the radio button, and it would add it as a content of that radio button. But I'm superstitious, and there was problems with, I think it was Blend 2, that it didn't like it when you directly applied it to there. It tried to adjust it based on some weird setting, so its margin would make it pushed off and everything. I don't want it to do that. I want it to just drop it in, don't try to fix anything, okay? So I'm going to drop it into the stack panel that this is in. And the stack panel is what's making those stack horizontally, right? So I'm just going to come over here, I'm going to paste it. Now we can barely see here. Okay, there it is on the end. Now I'm just going to take this and drag it, just like you drag anything, right? And I don't want to place it in the stack panel still. Can we read that? Yeah. Move to stack panel, right? No, I want to move it to radio button. So that puts it in as a child, as the content of that radio button. And unfortunately, we can't see anything because it's white and everything else is white. So I'm going to change that real quick. I've selected the window. And on the Properties tab, if I can keep it open, there we go. I'm going to come up, I want to change this background. Now I can either just click around here and make it whatever color I want, right? That's using the solid color brush. You could make it a gradient if you wanted. Change the different colors of the gradient. Or if you already have resources created, which I have, I can go ahead and go to the brush resources and see a list of what local resources I have. And I can select from there as well. Now, ideally, your resources that you use, you would have a designer create those, right?
Yeah.
The reality is that there's not many designers who have the knowledge of how Blend works to do that in a way that a developer is going to appreciate it very much. A lot of the naming conventions come to play. You know, I like to have things named a certain way. Design, a lot of the examples, design is more on, well, this is a rectangle and it is in the left, quadrant of whatever. It makes it easier if you have a stage where you can have the designer go ahead and put in what all he wants, what all the colors, the layouts are, and then you can come in and pick and choose what do I want to pull in, right, as a developer. So I could come into here, and the window background in this case is a gradient. We can see here. I can click on that little advanced options rectangle next to that, and I can say convert this to a new resource. I can give it a name. My demo brush. And where do I want to save it? I can save it to the application, which means it's going to save that into the application.xaml file. that means you have access to that from any form in your application, any window, sorry, in your application. I can apply it just to this document, which defaults to whatever that highest node is in your document structure, in this case window. Or I can apply it to a resource dictionary. Now all a resource dictionary is another file that lets you hold lists of these resources. So it can hold lists of brushes that you define, of colors you've defined, of any data templates or control templates, any of that, right? I'll go ahead and put it in there because I know one other main thing to point out is in AppXAML, it will always go ahead and pull in a resource dictionary if you've created a resource dictionary. Okay. So that means all of your application is going to have access to that same resource dictionary as well. So now, if I jump back over to, I'll close the dictionary because it opened it. If I jump back over to the demo window, I can come over here and select that same exact brush from there. Shows up in my list of local brush resources. All right, so now we can see it's easy to pull things over, right? Now one other thing we notice is that we still have these little radio button push pins or whatever they call them, right? That's not how the original design looked. I'm going to show you behind the curtain. If I can show this. All right, I got a commented out slice of markup here. This is that same in the slides. This is that same style that was in the slides. Now there's one thing. Okay, you can see it already. It went too quick. By uncommenting that, it automatically applied it to everything. Now the way that it does that is that this particular style is special because all it defines is a target type. Okay? It doesn't have a key defined for it. So like these value converters right up above here, it has a key so that you can apply that by name to a particular item in your structure. If you don't define a key, it's going to apply it to everything underneath wherever it's defined. In this case, I'm in the window, so everything in this window, any radio button in the window will automatically apply all of these properties to it. Okay? That's pretty powerful. It can be used for any of them. You have a particular requirement that all of your text boxes have to be gray on white or whatever. You could define a style and apply it in AppXAML so that every text box in the entire application gets those same settings without having to go and find them all and change properties and all that. Okay. All right. Let me zoom back in and figure out where we're at. Okay, I want to show you a data template now. Let's collapse this back. All we're seeing is this. Okay, this combo boxes, lists, they have an item source. Try to show it. Item source tells you where is it getting its items. In this case, my combo box is getting it by binding to my view model to the libraries property. So it's going to pull in whatever items are in that list. Well, it assumes it's a list, right? And that's going to be what shows up in your drop down. Now, similarly, it also has an item template. When I got to this, I went to Object, Edit Additional Templates, and right now it doesn't have any template at all, right? The only option I have is Create Template. I can't edit anything because there's nothing assigned to it. Now I can apply a resource to it. Well, I have one right here that I've created that is my library item data template. Now if I apply that, I didn't even show this running yet, did I? Did I show it running? I didn't, did I? Let me undo that. It makes a lot more sense when you see. All right, I'm going to do a Control Z. All right. Let me run this real quick. There's not enough time. All right, so if I add this, you'll notice the list there is really, the item in the list is showing the actual name of the class that it is bound to, okay? Applying a data template allows us to change what this is displaying. Right now what it's doing is it's showing whatever the toString is of that object. And the default for those is show me the fully qualified name of this class, of this object. All right. So now if we come in and change this, I'm going to apply a resource, library item data template. And run it. Okay. We now get a button in there instead of just a text block. But if you click it, actually changes the list. I only have one thing. It reloads whatever that is. Okay. Now if we come back in here, we can also go in and edit it. Now that we have it assigned, we can edit current. And it will bring up, there we go. It brings up what that should look like, okay? This is the XAML behind it. This is the markup of what it's actually contains. It's simply a grid with a button in it. The content of the button, instead of just displaying the toString, it's going to display the item name. And the binding for the command is bound to a click command on that object. Okay? That's how you hook them up. Bindings. Let's take this out. Show you how you set up a binding. So now on my button that I have highlighted, I'm going to come down. Actually, I don't know where it's at. I'm going to do a search. This is also very powerful. The search section, you can type something that you know should show up, right? Command, it's going to filter down your list. I need to look for content, I believe. Content right there. And if I want to bind to it, I click that same little square and I can set up a data binding. Now what this is doing, there's several different types of bindings you can do. What this is doing is it's looking at the data context of that particular item, And since this is bound, since this is bound using MVVM Lite, it can resolve the underlying view model, and based on where we're at, it's in the combo box, which is bound to the libraries property, and each item in the library has a click command and an item command. Okay, that's what this is showing me. So from here, I can simply say, in my item, I want this bound to the name, or I want it bound to the path, or whatever. Say OK. That's going to put in that binding item.name for us. Now when you run it, you're going to see the name in there. Okay. That's how, on probably 95% of the bindings that you need to do, I better not say that, 90% of the bindings you need to do, you can do it just like that. Figure out what point in my object structure I want to bind to a particular property and do it like that. Not have to go in and manually put in your curly brackets and remember how to, what every property is named correctly, right? Let's see here. All right, so that is a data template. Now I'm going to show you, where's my thing? Oh, yeah. All right. My object and timeline, I'm drilled down into that data template. That is my target right now. I want to pop back up to my window now. So I can click the return scope to window. Now I can see, the full object again, or the full view again. Control templates. I don't remember how I'd have had the control templates defined. Oh yeah, I want to do this. My list for the images. I want to go ahead and apply an item template to it as well. And it has in it defined a small icon data template. Pop that in. I want to see what it looks like. It has got a grid. It's got a grid that has a drop shadow effect on it. I'm not going to show you that. And it's got a button and a text block. The button, I really do need two monitors up here. Has a binding to a click command as well, just like the other one. And its style is defined. It's applying a particular style, image button style, which actually, if we look down here a little bit in the XAML, it's going to be defined down here somewhere. Button foreground. I'm not going to show you those. We don't have enough time. All right, we've been going for 55 minutes, and I've talked way too much. We probably ran out of tape by now. I do want to get Matt up here, kind of talk a little bit about some of the design aspects that we went through.
Okay. One of the things that made it really easy for me was, which one is it? Right here? Yeah, when in a perfect world, I would have built these all into nice little resources, everything, so Keith could have just come in, extracted them, and just literally pasted them right into his XAML. But like he said, you almost have to be a programmer to do that really, really well. So I think that's the one thing I think to remember if you're ever in projects and you have someone that you can work with, this solution works really, really well for us, and it has for the entire project that we worked with Mark's team as well both Keith and Mark. The good thing is it helps keep your programming and my fake programming separate, so I don't basically break anything. I did work on a project once not too long ago with consulting where they were brave enough to let me go in and do some of those things and style some of the resources that already existed in their test before they pushed it to production. It worked pretty well to do specific things, like to go and update the styles of a button, to actually go a step further with doing the overstates, the click states, and stuff like the off states or the disabled states. That worked really, really well for specific things, and the tools in Blend make that very, very easy. So, it's things like that that will make things, I think, really convenient as we grow further in the future. All of the elements are very similar to what Adobe Illustrator, mainly, because it's a vector-based program. So there wasn't really a huge learning curve. The only learning curve I really had was just knowing that there was you had the design view and then you had the XAML view. And actually in the earlier version of Blend that we used, 3.5, this actually made it really, really nice because it was really quirky. And some of the things you thought, okay, it's exactly 22 pixels tall by however wide. Well, you come back later and find out that, well, it was like 22.3543, whatever. And, it made it easier to make sure that all these things were consistently the same size for Keith and his team. I could then go in then to the XAML. That's what made it nice for me, and make a lot of those updates to make sure, here the offset wasn't 0.5443, it's 0 or what have you. So I was able to learn a little bit of that and I think help streamline our process. But for the most part, it's pretty easy to go in, basically take this stuff, size it, resize it, move it around. And then just basically have it set up into logical grouped grids, which Keith could then, and his team could go in, extract it, and implement it with some fine tuning. That's pretty much all. It's just a nice, common ground that we have to sort of bridge the two disciplines and hopefully help style things a little bit more efficiently and nicely. Any questions?
Question for you, Matt.
Yes, sir.
One of the things is, and you started alluding to it like a button, there's the click state, the default state. There's more than one visual in there.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also sometimes the transitions, in terms of how you want it to expand a little bit or
Mm-hmm.
change color slightly so you can see actual click. Did you do much with that? And
Yes.
work with the storyboarding, or is that something more key?
No, I didn't. We haven't really ventured into that quite yet. And that's a good question, because that's something we've talked about before, how in later iterations of your product, we'd like to work on some of that transitioning. We haven't really got into that very much at this point. We intend to when time and resources allow. But I have went through, and I do have states. When I start off like with this, where's the
Lapsed.
where's the timeline?
Objects and time. There you go.
I do go through and okay, there's the down. Right now I have the down state. There's the down over state. There's just the regular state, and there's the over state for the unclicked regular state. So I will go through and create all those resources, and then Keith can. What this ends up being, and I think you've made references before, it's just a nice reference then too for you to refer back to, just to make sure, because I know you want to get it all together, style it very quickly, and then later on as time allows, you fine tune it to try to perfect it. And this is just ends up being a nice reference tool too, to see what does it need to be to make it perfect. But this was our quick approach at trying to create an application for this. So it's as good as it can be.
A couple questions then. So then on the transition styles that you're talking about now, your primary user experience goal is to give them more intuitive feedback and to guide them through. That's the prime on applying that kind of technique.
Yes.
Right? So then from the management of Blend, I understand, Keith, you were talking about that these resources you can categorize them and store them in a central file.
Mm-hmm.
That's a place where a designer probably could the dictionary, so that then
It's
you can leverage them across more. They could somewhat manage those.
assets.
Yes. Now, what about the transitions one though? Are those? Do you have the ability to do part of that in the central? Because some of it's going to be particular to the specific widget, or
Yes.
specific screen. That as you're trying to separate the two is what I'm wondering.
Yeah, yeah. What you can do is, let's say that 80% of this particular type of widget needs to react just like this, right? So you could create a style and whatever templates you need with the changes in state and all that. Store that in your resource dictionary, and then if you have that other whatever 10% where it's different, it's really the same widget, but the interaction needs to be different. You can define those within those particular windows or within that particular widget itself. Say this is my default behavior and this is my, you know.
Isn't that done in assets? Isn't that where you store all those with the button rollovers?
That way you can leverage his work, the designer's work. They get it.
I was just trying to show a quick
Resources.
Oh, resources. There you go.
Asset.
And so you have centralized, you could also have like the screen
Is there a button? Do we have a button in here?
Probably not.
Yeah.
There we go.
So you somewhat kind of plan out your resource architecture.
So I could go
How
and
you, what kind of resources you want, how you want to divide them.
what
up.
was that? Just click this one.
Yeah.
I think you click on
Sure. Well,
To edit
because
it.
you think about most business apps, I mean, I think about most of them that I work on, we're probably talking at least 50 to 100 screens, all right? I mean, we're talking about both of them. So you do want that opportunity to create and leverage the consistency of the style and the designer come in, and that's where a central dictionary would make a lot of sense.
I'm lost. Where do you find
I
that?
have one more follow-up
Uh-huh.
designer question there.
Sure.
Again, from a business perspective, you can tell I've always been interested in this presentation. I wanted to know. Now, besides making it look prettier,
Okay.
okay, and this isn't a plan, besides making
Sure,
it look
no.
prettier, what is from a designer perspective, you found in the project you've worked on that has helped add the biggest business value? And what was that value and what were the styling designer techniques?
Usability. We were able to address usability at all stages of development, and we were able to address those relatively quickly as well. Styling was the first thing we tried to establish, and we tried on a real world project. We would have probably addressed styling much earlier in the process, so the development team could kind of go into it at least having some idea of the styling. But then as we went along, what really helped with this is when it really helped with this is that when we needed to make changes, we were able to move things around fast. We were able to make adjustments and make corrections pretty fast. That would probably be the biggest advantage, I would think.
So usability as far as just more of a general intuitiveness and
Of the application, yeah.
understanding what's going on with how you're
Exactly.
Working with the controls and stuff.
Because you know how it is. I mean, once you start off developing something, you think, well, I think this is going to make sense. But actually, after people start working with it and you actually using it, you find that 80% of what you decide to do is right on, but there's still that 20% where you just need to make refinements and adjustments because it could be better. And that's I think what really made this an even more powerful tool.
Okay, well here's a bit of a follow-up and going with it now. Compared to like a WinForms where you're talking about styling for consistency and things, always in WinForms you were trying to force fit what WinForms could do for usability. What would you say in terms of flexibility with this kind of approach?
Did you?
leaps and bounds better. In the old technique is we get a static image back of this is what my form should look like. It has to look exactly like this. How do we do that? Well, it used to be, okay, let's try to trim out this little section of that big form and use it as the background on a particular palette or a button or something, right? You could never get it to look the same. You could never meet what the designer's intent was on that, unless well, no, you just couldn't.
Well, and even with this button, this is a really good example. On our project, we started off having a much more shiny style, which was at the time much more reminiscent to a pretty average Windows sort of texture of a button. As we got further into it and functionality started getting added to various screens, that button style was used on lots of buttons on the same screen. And we were like, oh, that's just like, it's like too much bling here. You know, we need to, now that we have it in a different context, we need to address the way we're styling these buttons. Aesthetically, yes, but also usability-wise, it was just drawing too much attention to itself. So we were able to very quickly restyle that and apply it across the board. And that's a huge, powerful thing to be able to do, especially that way downstream.
Have you guys done anything or learned anything when it comes to more of a information presentation? And I'm thinking of things like in a lot of business applications, you've got your classic master grid, detailed grids, and the challenges of you know, presenting it to the user that's still something that gives them the intuitiveness and walking. Because I understand this, and it helps. I know that it's more like a quan, you know, kind of thing, and it makes a lot of sense and value. But in a lot of business apps, a lot of users are pushing for loading up a ton of information on the screen. You know, a lot of rows, basically. And I didn't know if from now that there's basically a new platform to address some of these things, if you, I'm not trying to steal proprietary secrets, it's more of, you know.
Well, master detail is almost built in terms of a lot of the collection controls. You have a selected item, and then you can put the detail view in, and it's with the project that we've done for the last couple of years, that's actually the model.
Well, and I understand from a coding accelerator, right? You can get to the solution faster. But I'm talking about from a designability then, what, you know, I guess is your opinion on those, or what have you done to try to enhance the usability of those kind of things? If there is much you can do with it.
There's when it comes to those really fine details, I can establish the style here, but because of my lack of programming knowledge, Keith still has to take it and go a step further. This does allow me to at least get those styles present in Blend, even though I don't have them completely wrapped in this perfectly refined resource that any of you could then take and just really nicely plug into your code. It at least allows them to break it down and see how I've built it using the tools and the line weights and the sizing and colorizing and stuff in Blend, and then implement that, deconstruct it, and then being able to then take the styles, the default styles, deconstruct those and implement my styles into that. And I think that's made it pretty easy for you, at least, to be able to have it in a, like I said, a common form that kind of meets in the middle, and they were able to take the baton and take it a step further. So I'm still able to style those elements, just not, and it's mostly because of my lack of knowledge, really, not as efficiently as maybe we'd like in the future. Does that answer your question?
Well, one other thing
Maybe
I want to add, though, is one of the really nice things is that your initial crack at how do I, solve this usability problem. I want my view to look like this, right? It's very easy to change it as you learn more. Whereas, doing that with, prior technologies, you really had to do a lot more research up front, figure out exactly, how is the user going to react to this if I put it in, if I present it to the user in this form. Couldn't change it late. Whereas with this, all right, let's just throw up a prototype. Let's get a little bit of feedback on this. If it comes back good or they have suggestions, making those changes is much more cost effective because of the tooling.
Okay. It's not that you're not answering it, because there's a ton of real, legitimate, and value in the whole human-computer interface. What kind of colors, what kind of weight, location, proportionality, so that the user can approach the given screen, given page, and have a quick request response you know, tidbit conversations with that particular screen. But then there's, and I don't be all poetic here, but then there's longer conversations that you need to have with the user and complete them through a bigger task as well. Those are, the current paradigm sucks, and it makes it to where even those little blurbs, you know, oh, I want you to focus on this area of the screen, and then when you make your decision, click this button, and, you know, classic WinForm or all the others aren't great for that, you know, especially when we do it. I'm good at
Bang,
that.
bang,
Yeah.
right?
So that's, you have to have a more approachable layout first before you then go on, and I'm just curious, because I do think that this is the enabler to help with that first wave of those, but then how do you make it to where, all right, you got to process something that's more sophisticated, have that longer conversation, presenting a lot of information, or assisted, you know, you think of a wizard, you know, in the classic sense, and we got to assist the user through multiple steps, the wizard type thing, and you then put ugly with awkward, and you get the untrainable app, right? And so, I don't mean to I'm not trying to steal designer consoling hours here.
Oh no, I understand.
You know, if there's things, because I think that we do need to get better at that.
Yeah, this is kind of like an offline, but there's probably two ideas within this designer workspace that both these two guys are very familiar with. One's like the sketch flow in terms of the flow. We get the ideas. You saw the sketches Keith did. Those sketches in the beginning, or the equivalent of that in software, is where you really want to get started with the first ideas. But you can almost make that more of a playable kind of thing to see how it would flow and how it would evolve. And then you can do the visual aspects as another side where you can have like just design
Styling,
data,
yeah.
where you just have a designer doing it where the back end's not there much, and you can do the development behind and the design up front very differently and in parallel paths. Okay, but again, that's changing the scope of the presentation and really expanding it.
I tend to do that.
It's no problem.
I actually saw a presentation using an earlier version of this where they had a line of paper and they actually programmed it that way. The first time it just was little, it was all hand drawn, look hand drawn. And I think there's a way to do that. I don't know how.
Yeah,
Sketch
sketch
Sketch flow.
That's sketch flow. So you guys didn't use that in this particular
Did-
case, but you could have.
Didn't use it, but yeah, it was available.
Yeah.
I've never used it actually, so I,
Great for prototype.
What if
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
prototype and flows, you just do static pictures, so this will transition to this, and it does transitions and kind of use an organization. It's like an automated.
any more questions or? Good. All right, well,
Thank you.
thank you.